מבקשים מכל מי שרוצה לצאת מהטריבונה לא לצאת אחורה, רק קדימה. אחורה זה סכנת נפילה. Versi vi la ruga in fine parenches, so la ruga in noro font in nicht auf Inter.
Rabbi Shimon, אשר בורכתו במרוי סירים שיובדתו שום כוניסו אוי תחובנו
Oh,
Shime Yehu Yoy, Me Yoy Kulinu El Yoy, Adoi Neini Bar Yoy Choy. Yiboy Veish Milchomo, Vedas Toirus Emimu, Ulei Madu Vechochmu, Adoi Neini Bar Yoy Choy. Oiduas kol talimois veyois vesatzimois ulumailois lumois Adoi neini bar yoy choy. Ichbu besoich meyeru mipnei yagzeiru shamlu matzis heitoiru Adoi neini bar yoy choy. Sham nivru mayonoi vechoriv lemachuloi Matoim chelkoi vechevloi Adoi neini bar yoy choy. Zecher tzadik livrocho Dein reicho yivarecho Zikur rabim bezocho Adoi neini bar yoy choy. Chidesh kamu aluchois Ein bam mishnu arichois Zei amargis mamluchois Adoi neini bar yoy choy. Tiei rasir tever yu Suoi soneki yu Oy diloi mishma yu Adoi neini bar yoy choy. Yuda kol amistogois Devoravois iferois Viteil kamu gezeirois Adoi neini bar yoy choy. Kol yumo asher choyo Oy sakeshes loimiyu Ki hi oy soy lomoyo Adoi neini bar yoy choy. Lecham Yisrael leir Besoy toiru aboyim Geoy rachamu mazir Adoi neini bar yoy choy. Bukoy bucham bishmayu Imanu viachiyu Zemibnei aliyu Adoi neini bar yoy choy. Nechmod ve'oid lemalu Zuchu likar yigdilu Keser elyoy noi niglu Adoi neini bar yoy choy. Sinai, Loi Nikro, Ari Shevechaviru, Vimani Teitzei Soiru, Adonai Bar Yochai.
Oy va'amartem kol lechoy, Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai. Va'amartem kol lechoy, Rabbi Shimon tzadikoy.
Shivim tikinim, Yekorim mipninim, Vamtikeinu elyonim, Adonai Bar Yochai.
Oy va'amartem kol lechoy, Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai. Va'amartem kol lechoy, Rabbi Shimon tzadikoy.
Oy Pesach espir v'chochmu, Oy tziyor talimu, Tikein zorechamu, Adonai Bar Yochai.
Va'amartem kol lechoy, Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai. Va'amartem kol lechoy, Rabbi Shimon tzadikoy.
Tzadik Yesoid, Oilam, Gilu Medrash Anelam, Yuchoy Liftoiru Oilam, Adonai Bar Yochai.
Oy va'amartem kol lechoy, Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai. Va'amartem kol lechoy, Rabbi Shimon tzadikoy.
Koiloi zimeiru vitzim, Veichises hakoitzim, Veitzila lechitzim, Adonai Bar Yochai.
Va'amartem kol lechoy, Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai. Va'amartem kol lechoy, Rabbi Shimon tzadikoy.
Ruchuno v'meirim, B'shivtoyim chaverim, Eis gilu soid misturim, Adonai Bar Yochai.
Oy va'amartem kol lechoy, Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai. Va'amartem kol lechoy, Rabbi Shimon tzadikoy.
Shuloim rov al mishkovoi, Mayof yoyim ativoi, Doi veremes bilvuvoi, Adonai Bar Yochai.
Va'amartem kol lechoy, Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai. Va'amartem kol lechoy, Rabbi Shimon tzadikoy.
Toirusoi, Mugein luni, Ime yiraseineni, Yam nitztoiv baneini, Adonai Bar Yochai.
Va'amartem kol lechoy, Rabbi Shimon Adonai bar Yochai.
Toirusoi, Mugein luni, Ime yiraseineni, Yam nitztoiv baneini, Adonai Bar Yochai. Toirusoi, Mugein luni, Ime yiraseineni, Yam nitztoiv baneini, Adonai Bar Yochai. ואמרתם כה לכוי
Dem koile khoy Rabbi Shimon bar khoy va hamam dem koile khoy Rabbi Shimon tzaddik koy Oy yishem gein kudoshi yats vayin lo vase let go kham yas gei agoy meri vay khoy Oy kudoshi yoy kudoshi na yego yoy be oy kudin luvel yoy agoy meri vay khoy Atzule du mit Why feel more than after all that we know Mulle mando and tapo Agoy nei vay khoy Oy du gas con darling boys bebe boys and something boys Kullu malas go boy Agoy nei vay khoy Oy, you know the time for your love, and you can hang that say no. Some no mountains it's when they low. I'm going to be by a color. The song is no my employ, that's going and back to look. But the time going back to look, we are going to be by a color. Hoy se nos canta el libro todo, en el rojo y para el rojo, si tú vas en verso todo, hago en el y para el rojo. Hoy si te escapo a lo cual, te va a escuchar el cual, se ama y va a lo cual, hago en el y para el rojo. Hoy tierra sirve yo, uso hoy son yo. Hoy día yo mismayo, hago en el baño You can call on to us, no one was in the Big take up of the hoy, hago en el baño You, hoy saqué pues yo, y yo soy lo yo, hago en el baño Le camp sous un level, le secret au raboui, qui hoy n'a pas mon marge, hago en el baño Hoy bukoy bukano bismayo, imano viyakiyo, sami bne yaliyo, agoy nei bayan koy. Hoy nakma de miyan nari mamlu, sukun tinga iktilu, kaisa na yan maiglo, agoy nei bayan koy. Hoy Sinai, Giloy Mikro, Hoy Yahadi Sheba Habero, Bintani Taisen Toyo, Agoy Baby Baya Koho. Hoy Yusuf Shigim Tikini, Yakurei Tikini, Kopti Kainu and Yoti, Agoy Baby Baya Koho. The people of oh, it's your darling boy. Tickets on the table, I'll go down by your phone.
Okay, so that was a test of the emergency Yiddish system. The reason I decided to do this stream is because a lot of things have been coming together over the last few days. And one of those things is this concept of to bind and loosen on earth as in heaven. Who are the priests of God? Who are those who represent God in the world? there's a lot of channels on the internet. By the way, anybody who wants to join, it would be nice to have somebody to discuss with, because I don't want to lecture. I don't think you can lecture about this. I don't think it is merely propositional. In this little corner, we talk a lot about the propositional, the perspectival, the participatory, and the procedural. Got all four of them. Propositional knowledge is and Elijah is right. You know it's serious because Jacob is wearing a button-up shirt. Yes, you know it's serious because Jacob is wearing a button-up shirt. The propositional are those things which we can talk about and say, I'm wearing a shirt, wearing a button-up shirt, and that is a proposition. Am I wearing a button-up shirt or not? Yes, I am. Then there's the procedural, which tells you how to do things. And that is also something you can learn. And then, according to neuroscience, there is the perspectival and my brain will provide the last one. Procedural, perspectival. Why don't I just pull up the 4 Ps again? 4 Ps. Verveki. Participatory. And the participatory is different from the procedural and the perspectival. And I'm not 100% sure how that precisely works. But it does. It does work. The fact is that we live in a world where there is reality, and there's a God of history, and there's a God who rules this world, and there's a God whose word, whose holy word, has proven itself over thousands of years to be precisely what we mean by prophetic. And prophetic doesn't merely mean predicting the future. It doesn't merely mean predicting the future, but it does mean predicting the future. It does mean being able to see patterns in the world, to be able to say of a small temple in one part of the world, when Isaiah, so we have the great Isaiah scroll, it's over 2,000 years old. And in that great Isaiah scroll, it says, Beiti beit tefillah yikareh lechol ha'amim. My house will be called a house of prayer for all the nations. This was before the discovery of the New World. There were entire continents, Australia, Antarctica, North and South America, of which we were utterly unaware. There were things in the depths of Asia, in the north of Europe, in the heart of Africa, which were beyond anything Isaiah had access to. And Isaiah was able to say, Beiti Beit Tefillah Yikareh Lechol Ha'amim, it shall be called a house of prayer to all the nations. And over 2,000 years later, that live stream, even though Lag BaOmer is over, right? That live stream from Myron has some 2,000 people watching it. And yesterday, when it was still Lag BaOmer, it's no longer Lag BaOmer in Israel. Now it's Lag BaOmer. It's the 34th day of the Omer in Israel. It's the 33rd of the Omer still here in the United States. But the fact that that actually means something, that billions of Christians are looking forward to a Pentecost when they don't even know what the word Pentecost means. There are some people who actually count the Pentecost, who count the 7 weeks and know what it means to count the 7 weeks from the Passover to Pentecost. And there are other people who look on a map, on a calendar, but also a map, and they cannot make that calendar themselves. They have no capacity to say Easter is on this day of the month and not on that day of the month. How do you know when Pentecost is? How do you know when Pentecost is? That's a real question you have to ask yourself. As a Christian, tell me, how do you know when Pentecost is? And a similar question is vital to every actual Jew. How do I know when Shavuot is? When those 7 weeks are over? Come on, Matt. Jump on. I know you want to. The link's right there. Phlebas, any of the Christians, tell me, how do you know when Easter is? And if you're a Protestant, please give me your sola scriptura answer. Yes, Phlebas, jump on. Would love to hear your answer. How do you know when Easter is? How do you know when Pentecost is? When it comes down to a question of authority, right? Who gets to say? There's a reason I use the picture of Rabbi Breidowitz for the stream. There's a reason I used Rabbi Breidowitz. Because we have an internet full of rabbits. And there's one rabbi who really engages with YouTube. And that's Rabbi Yitzchak Breidowitz. And I can explain to you propositionally in ways that few people can what exactly gives Rabbi Yitzchak Breidowitz the power to bind and loosen on earth as in heaven. Rabbi Breidowitz is not one of the Gedolei Hador, the Poskim Hador. Israel has Poskim. There are people, and there is a hierarchy that is not explicit. It is difficult to understand exactly how someone climbs up that hierarchy. Trust me, it was something I really spent a long time trying to figure out. There's that book on my bookshelf over there. Kitzur Shulchan Aruch Yalkut Yosef. by Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak. And it is an anthology of the Piskei Din of his father, Rabbi Ovadia Yosef. And Rabbi Yitzchak Yosef, I believe still, is currently the Sephardic chief rabbi of Israel. He should live long and be well. He's not his father. He's a shadow of his father. And I don't think he would disagree with me. Hello, it's the system. Rabbi Ovadia Yosef, at the age of 25, was asked to finish an incomplete work called the Kaf HaChaim by someone who was considered one of the Poskei Hador, one of the people who had the authority to bind and loosen on earth as in heaven. I'm using that term because it is a Jewish term that is referenced in the Christian Bible. And the fact is that archaeologically, we've been able to validate Jewish history according to Jewish history in ways that many people doubted. I myself doubted, honestly. But why should we be surprised that the Jews remember our own history? Why is it that we assume that the best source for actual facts, that when you dig up the ancient ruins in the land of Israel, what you will find will not match exactly what is the memory of the people who lived it, and the people who lived it is Israel. We know who Israel is. You know who Israel is. And it's not the Black Hebrew Israelites, and it's not any of the various rabbits on the internet, no matter whether they grow their beard long or they wear funny hats or not. There is an actual lineage, there is an actual priesthood of Israel. There is an actual nation of Israel. And that word nation comes from nativity, from being born. And while being the children of Abraham applies to everyone, and being the children of Isaac applies to probably a majority of the world, being the children of Jacob, being the children of Israel, is a very specific thing that if you are a Christian or a Muslim, you have to seriously look in your own scripture and see what that means. And I think any honest Christian recognizes that, in fact, I have to point Romans 9, 10, and 11. Andrew, you're supposed to be taking your finals.
No, that's Charlie.
Oh, you're supposed to be taking your midterms.
No, I just finished.
You finished your midterms. Mazel tov.
Oh, thanks.
How'd they go?
Pretty well. I mean, Not like amazing, not decent, just pretty well. So,
Okay, pretty well is fine.
uh,
Nobody's actually gonna care about your GPA, but you should graduate. So what made you decide to jump on?
you looked lonely.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
you
I
said.
have if you look very closely, you can see the shadow of death in her valley. There's one ear and most of her body. She's sleeping, so deep breaths. But you can still see the ear right there. Have you picked a saint yet?
No, I really should.
You have 4 or 5 days.
Yeah.
Fleabit says, I have a new Jordanian Muslim brother-in-law that I met on the weekend. Send help. Well, as I have often pointed out, I believe that God created Islam so Christians wouldn't misunderstand his meaning in the world. If there was no Islam, Christians might actually think they were right, and if there was no Christianity, Muslims might think they're right. But as it is, God has created the world in such a way that it's perfectly clear Judaism is right and Christianity and Islam are wrong. Right, Andrew?
What?
He's being baptized on Sunday. He can't actually admit the truth. I am skeptical of the church's authority to canonize. Who can know a man's heart? Correct. And I am also skeptical, honestly, of the Jewish capacity to canonize saints. Do I know that the Rebbe was, in fact, the saint that I believe he was? So there was a website created by an ex-member of Chabad who, with the zeal of a convert to Judaism, had fallen in love with the Rebbe. And when the Rebbe died, with the zeal of a scorned convert, created a website called Failed Messiah, where he tried to find every single thing that the Rebbe ever did wrong in his life. And that's a lot of material to go through. You have to kind of be mentally ill to go through all that material, because when the Rebbe became the leader of Chabad in 1952, he had already set up for his father-in-law. Back in the 50s, they were already making color videotapes of the previous Rebbe and distributing them all over the place. So the cameras were in place, and since the very first day that the Rebbe became Rebbe, they recorded his materials, they recorded everything. And he died in 1994. So he had his stroke in 1992, which was about 40 years after he became Rebbe. And so there's 40 years of material. And for instance, on the Sabbath, there were some 20 people who made it their job, when a recording was not permitted, to memorize everything that the Rebbe said. And after the Sabbath, they would each sit down and write what he said down. And then they would get together and compare notes and reconstruct what the Rebbe's speeches, and those would get printed, right? And so there's all of the Rebbe's letters. He wrote thousands of letters. I've read at least hundreds, probably thousands of the Rebbe's letters. And so this guy created a website going through every last thing. And the funniest thing for me was he had a section where he was trying to prove that the Rebbe had been racist to black people. And if you know the history of Chabad and Crown Heights and the Crown Heights riots, if you don't know that history, go ahead and look it up. I would not have been surprised if the Rebbe had at least referred to somebody as a Schwarza. Schwarza is somewhat of a derogatory way of referring to black people in Yiddish. At least some people use it that way. Literally, it's not derogatory at all. And so I wouldn't have been surprised if he had at least carelessly made a mention, something like that. The man was born in 1902 in Russia and came to the United States, and in 1994 died at the age of 92. If a 90-year-old man, after the Crown Heights riots, had made a derogatory racial remark, I wouldn't have been surprised. What surprised me is that there's none of that. Absolutely none of that. Like the video they had on Failed Messiah, if I remember correctly, was some guy came to the Rebbe for dollars, and he was black, and the Rebbe did not actually like spend as much time on him as he generally does with the thousands of people who came to him for dollars. So the Rebbe would stand for 10, 12 hours a day, and people would walk by and he would give each of them $1 to give to charity, right? And at the time, you know, they would if they had something to say to him, he would respond, he would say something to them, he would give them a blessing, right? So he did this days on days on end. And there are videos of it all over the internet. And apparently one time, one black guy came by and the Rebbe gave him the $1 without even looking at him. And this was the worst, most racially insensitive thing that this website could find. And that was like, wow. I wish that was the extent of, if I had been under such scrutiny. I like, if you were looking through my life for things to embarrass me and to prove that I am not the Messiah, let me tell you, you will find much better ammunition than that. And so, yeah, I am very skeptical of anybody's authority to canonize anyone. But the fact is, we have saints, and we need saints, and the world does not continue without saints. It doesn't work. Elijah says the interesting thing about Messiah candidates is that they always die until they don't. There's that famous quote by Rosenzweig. It's one of my favorite. I think I actually didn't I pin it? I think I pinned it. Is this where it is? That's not where it is. Where did I pin it? In Torah? Where did I pin that thing by Rosenzweig? Franz Rosenzweig. in questions. That's where I did not pin it. I will pin it now. Pin message. The expectation of the coming of the Messiah, by which and because of which Judaism lives, would be a meaningless theologomon, a mere idea in the philosophical sense, empty babble if the appearance again and again of a false Messiah did not render it reality and unreality, illusion and disillusion. The false Messiah is as old as hope for the true Messiah. He is the unchanging form of the changeless hope. He separates every Jewish generation into those whose faith is strong enough to give themselves up to an illusion, and those whose hope is strong enough so that they do not allow themselves to be deluded. The former are better, the latter stronger. The former bleed on the altar of eternity of the people. The latter are the priests who perform this service at the altar. And this goes on until the day when all is reversed, when the belief of the unbeliever will become a truth and the hope of the hoping a lie. Then, and no one knows whether this day may not be this very day, the task of hoping will come to an end. And when the morning of that day comes, everyone who still belongs among those who hope and not among those who believe will run the risk of being rejected. The danger hovers the apparently less endangered life of the hopeless. Franz Rosenzweig, quoted in The Personal Messiah, page 21. I almost started this stream with quoting the latter half of Acts 5, where Gamliel the elder, the grandfather of Rabban Gamliel, is quoted as speaking to the Sanhedrin and saying to them, "Leave these men alone, because if it is of God, then you don't want to find yourself on the wrong side of it. And if it is not of God, it will fall away by itself." And the fact is that it did. Those apostles who stood before the Sanhedrin left no children. There are no Christians left who can stand before a Sanhedrin and say that we are observant members of Israel, that we are the descendants of Israel, that we know the Torah, that we are in fact the inheritors of the Torah, and we believe that Jesus is the Messiah. That's how you know Jesus is not the Messiah. He is not the Messiah of the Jews. And if the Jews don't believe he's the Messiah, then how can he be the Messiah of the Jews? In every church where there's a crucifix, and upon that crucifix it says, Yeshu HaNotzri, Melech Yehudayin, and there's a tiny spelling mistake, as there is in Richard's church that Andrew and I went to. It mocks Jesus. That sign mocks Jesus. Not because a Jew put it there, but because a Roman put it there. And ultimately, Christianity is the Church of Rome, not the Church of Jerusalem. And that's how you know Christianity is wrong. Christians were Jacobites before the Jacobites. Here, I'll pull up my favorite, one of my favorites paintings. And here's a close-up of it. Yeshua Notzri, and then the rest of it, which should read Melech Yehudaim, is illegible because nobody knew the words. I didn't draw that. It's called Christ Crucified. It's 500 years old. There's a bunch of people watching.
You want me to respond?
Feel free. I'm not going to force you.
I don't know.
When you make icons, you'll get the Hebrew right, right?
I was just thinking about how words are like icons, for what they represent. So I think I'm always going to get the Hebrew wrong.
You're always going to get the Hebrew wrong?
Yeah.
Yeah, words represent things.
Mhm.
Yeah, they do. Yeah. Been having a little discussion with Father Stephen about God, Cain, Abel, and Jesus.
Mhm.
And I wrote something and he wrote something, and this was my response. This is the last thing I wrote to him. I was thinking how to explain what I believe is the fundamental mistake here, and I came to the idea that it is fundamentally not propositional, as Vereki would put it, but participatory and perspectival. Do you know the prayer Elokai Neshama? It is mentioned in the Talmud already. I would be surprised if it was not around during the time of Jesus. I am still unconvinced that the fundamentally polytheistic understanding of Paul derives from people after him, as opposed to Paul's misunderstandings himself. But even Paul seems to understand the difference between Jesus the man and the eternal character of what he seems to call the Christ. And if you spend any time saying Elokai Neshama, I think the fundamental difference gets to the fundamental difference that I think the Trinitarians had so much trouble with. There's an essential difference between Cain and Abel and God in the story of Cain, Abel, and God. Mayaphysite, Monophysite, Diaphysite, these miss it. Elokai Neshama Shenatata Bita Horahi, Atavarata. And the term Elokai there is not incidental. Vanderklay understands something fundamental about God 1 and God 2.
So how do you get from God 1 to God 2?
You don't get from one God to God 2. It's Seder Hishtalshalut. It is hypostases all the way down. That's the problem of the Trinity, is not understanding Seder Hishtalshalut. And I don't know how to translate Hishtalshalut. self-enchainment. Maybe that might be the best way I can translate Seder Hishtalshalut, order of self-enchainment.
Tzimtzum. Yeah.
Tzimtzum is a part of Seder Hishtalshalut. Yes. And Elijah's right. It's a trap, Andrew. Don't do it. If you say that it isn't from heaven, then why has God allowed Christians to spread the word instead of the Jews? It is from heaven. Who said it's not from heaven? I believe very much exactly what Maimonides says at the end of chapter 11 of the Laws of Kings and Wars. That it is directly from God that Christianity and Islam exist, because it is directly from God that everything exists. How, as a Jew, could you believe that anything, Adolf Hitler existed because God created him? And if you deny that, you are denying Judaism. How many times do I have to pull up the verse in Isaiah where it says, I create good and I create evil. I create light and I create darkness. I am the Lord. I create all of these. Yes, we are actually monotheistic in Judaism. Believe it or not, we are in fact monotheists.
Maybe you explained this earlier, but what does bind on earth as in heaven mean?
I did not explain that earlier. So Philippa says, you seem to agree Jews won't recognize the Messiah. No, I don't agree at all. What I was quoting was Rosenzweig saying that at some point, all the people who don't recognize the Messiah don't understand. But as long as not everyone recognizes that it is the Messiah, then obviously he has not, in fact, he is not the Messiah. You could argue he will be the Messiah, but until there is nothing, the new covenant comes when no man shall teach his brother. See Jeremiah 31, which Christians constantly quote and don't seem to ever really like. I don't know why Christians constantly quote that verse, yet seem to completely gloss over a very important clause in that verse. What about Zeus and Mormons? Yes, God did create even the Mormons, and yet certainly Zeus. So to bind and loosen on earth as in heaven, isur veheter. So to say that something is asur means to say that it is forbidden, and to say it is mutar means that it is permitted. And there are certain rabbis who are moreh hora'ah, and yes, that word is related to Torah, who have the capacity to say that something is allowed and something is forbidden. And the question becomes, how do you know who that person is? And this has been a question within Judaism going all the way back to Moses, right? How do you know who is that person? And the hierarchy that Jethro recommends to Moses, and in fact becomes the hierarchy, is a divine hierarchy that is in some ways mysterious, but in other ways manifests itself through the Spirit of God and has done so for thousands of years, which is that there are the leaders of tens and the leaders of thousands, and then the elders, and then there's Moses who sits at the head of the 70 elders, and that is the Sanhedrin. And when Herod was made king over Israel by the Romans, the first thing he did was slaughter, I believe Josephus says 40 members of the Sanhedrin. There were 71 members, including the Nasi, including the prince, the president of the Sanhedrin. And first thing he did was slaughter 40 of them. And after the destruction, the Romans went around killing rabbis. And they killed many, many, many rabbis. And if that wasn't enough, there was a plague which killed thousands of Rabbi Akiva's students. And Lag BaOmer, which we were watching earlier in the stream, celebrates when that plague stopped. So in Judaism, we don't blame the plague of the Romans on the Romans any more than we blame the plague, any other plague, on human beings. Ultimately, it is God who gives life and gives death. Cain would not have been able to kill Abel if God had not ordained that Abel would die. Cain would not have been able to kill Abel if God had not ordained that Abel would die. Cain would not have been capable to actually kill his brother Abel if God had not ordained that Abel would die. This is theodicy. And so the greatest in our little corner, what rabbis we have, theodicy is Theodicy. God says. And it is the problem of life. Why do bad things happen to good people? And if you're a Christian, and this is the symbol of your religion, theodicy should be central to everything you ask yourself, which is, why does an innocent man suffer? So the question of binding on earth as in heaven. So Yosef is one of our rabbis, and Chazi is the other. Because Yosef and Chazi are two people who actually live Judaism, who love Judaism, who study the Torah, who know the Torah. And when you have a question, when you want to know what God would want in the world, you go and you ask the person who knows the Torah best. And the person who knows the Torah best is the person who lives the Torah best. Yosef it's not just the fact that Yosef has been doing Daf Yomi for 10 years. Yes, it's important that he has been doing Daf Yomi for 10 years because he knows the entirety of the Talmud and probably both Talmuds. But that's a result of the fact that every single day for the last 10 years, he's actually made it a thing he does, which is study a daf of Talmud, which is very, very difficult to do. Feel free to try it on yourself, although I don't recommend it. You will fail. And recognizing that some people are more holy than others, that some people are obviously more holy than others. When you go to a basketball game and you see a Michael Jordan or a LeBron James or a Kobe Bryant, you recognize that that person has a capacity to play the game in ways that you have no capacity to even try to play the game. And in a similar manner, when Rav Ovadia Yosef, like Yabia Omer was, you read it and you are humbled if you can read it at all. Same thing by Rav Moshe Feinstein. Igrot Moshe. You see his capacity to understand and to think in Torah in a way that was life-giving. And the Yanuka is only 35 years old now, I believe. He's 34. I don't know when his birthday is. I should probably look up when the Yanuka's birthday is. His birthday is apparently the 15th of ER. So today is ER is today. Today is the 18th of ER. So he has turned 35. He should live long and be well. And at age 35, like, you listen to him, if you know the Torah well enough to even understand what he's saying, and he lives the Torah on a daily basis. And that's why he has the authority to bind and loosen on earth as in heaven. Because if you recognize the authority of Torah, and you actually learn Torah, and you actually try to look at people who learn it and live it and know it and make it a real part of who they are in a real sense, you recognize what is and what is not Torah, and who knows it more and better and who knows it less and worse. And that is what gives you the capacity to stand in that hierarchy of the leaders of tens and the leaders of thousands and the elders and Moses. There's a reason why I decided to show the video of what's going on in Myron. Because there were thousands of Hasidim waiting for, I believe that was the Ramanitzer Rebbe. He's one of the rabbis who is acknowledged by thousands and thousands of actual Jews who live a life according to Torah as a leader in Israel. And that's not a propositional thing. That's a perspectival thing. He was leading the chanting and people were jumping up and down and dancing. That is the authority to bind and loosen on earth as in heaven. Let's see what's going on live. Let me see if has it ended or is it still going? Apparently, it is no longer live at Myron. Yeah, the camera's over. Sorry. But here, we'll go back a little bit. It's no longer live, but this was a little while ago. There's a spirit moving those men. And there's a spirit that's moving him. So Dan actually found me a channel where it's still going.
Can't go? Do this to clear out stuck poop fast. Fiber helps you poop.
This is YouTube. Can't hear him. But he's speaking. So I'm not going to put Sandy on the spot, but I am going to say the question becomes, who decides when Pentecost is? Who decides when the Spirit comes down on earth? Who actually has the authority to bring the Spirit down to earth? And I think for anyone who has ears to hear and eyes to see, the answer is clear. He does. Dan says, is this the group community that is celebrating there, or are there other sects nearby too? So they take turns, and they've been taking turns for the past 25 hours, 26 hours. This is the gravesite of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai in Meron, near the town of Tzfat, near the town of Tiberias in Israel. And for the past 25 hours or so, people have been lighting bonfires and having barbecues and dancing and celebrating the day that on the 33rd day of the count of the Pentecost, that the plague among the students of Rabbi Akiva stopped. Very funny, Dominic. I love you too. Are you still in Washington, Dominic? I'm driving up to pick up Happy soon. Chezi, you could jump on, you know. Okay, so I am going to be spending Memorial Day weekend in Washington, so yeah.
Yeah, put me on the spot or no, the answer has to be God. If you say anything else, you're going the other direction. Which relates to one of my questions.
So, the answer obviously is God. The question is, who represents God in the world?
Yeah.
And somebody represents God. If you believe that God has revealed himself, that God is incarnate, that God is embodied in the world, that his word is actually being spread through this world, which as a Jew, Christian, or Muslim, you must. The question becomes, where is the visible church as in Christian terms? And I mean, that is it is the theological question which everybody has to ask themselves. Where is the visible church of God in the world?
Sorry, just in case. That's something that's bothered me a long time. I've been in church my whole life, and not just one church, several, which was not necessarily which goes to that question, in the way that each church tries to determine the answer to that by themselves. Yeah, that's part of why I have struggled to answer some of the questions I've received from other Christians over my life about different things. Like one of my, you were talking earlier, and I forget what I said to it, but like you were asking about Pentecost. Well, we argue about 1,000 elements of that because I remember what one of the churches I went to was because the one I was attending was closed by the denomination. It was a tiny little one, and it was on a road allowance, and the town took the road allowance back. And it was away from where I was living. And my girlfriends and I were looking for somewhere else to go. And she came to me. We'd been going to a small Bible study. I've talked about going to home churches and home Bible studies. And similar things when at school, at university. I found out later one of the on-campus Bible studies I went to was actually affiliated with the CRC, which was another of the churches I ended up in. But this particular one, she came excited because we valued the people who had been leading our Bible study, who were Anglican in background. We were not going there at the moment. And she came and she said, I have found a Pentecostal Anglican church. The guy at the door, like just the old guy at the door. She made sure to say the old guy at the door, one of their greeters, elders, deacons. I'm not sure the structure at that point, what position he had. But something about her initial encounter with him talked to her in the same place we valued the people who had been leading us as teenagers, go to camp, learn to be good leaders, how to follow God properly, like reading your Bible regularly, the stuff that they chose to do. But then I see Pentecostal denominations in churches. And the question even went through the CRC denomination while I was in there. And having chosen to be involved with some of those elements myself because I valued places in my past, I'm highly disturbed by some of what we see. Because half of the way that we analyze and ask the questions as to what is valuable doesn't get anywhere near to the proper answer. And you're talking about watching the Spirit move among those people, celebrating in the video clips you showed. I've watched clips of something similar that came into my feed once a while ago. Even that is something where, with the wrong leader in position, people, we all know that. So I don't have a good answer to your question. I just have questions.
No, that is 100%. Look, if you if you don't have a religion, one will be provided to you without your knowledge and consent. If you don't know what spirit is leading you, you will be led by a spirit without your knowledge and consent. Right. Because we are all led by spirits. The question becomes which, and that is what it means to bind and loosen on earth as in heaven. It means, okay, who is the person who I am going to, the Hebrew term for it is mashgiach ruchanit, the spiritual supervisor, right? Who am I going to, or the Christian term is episkopos, right? Who is the overseer? Who is the mevaker? Who is the visitor, right? And even if you do the CRC thing of denying that there is a bishop, obviously Paul Vanderklay is a bishop in the CRC.
in a lot of ways, and so are some other people.
Yeah, and
Everybody
so
argues
There-
about that fact and about who is and isn't, and don't even realize we're arguing about it.
well, I mean, if
We
you
do.
refuse, if you refuse to, and this is what kills me about, and Chad will love this. Here, Chad, I'll pull your finger. This is what kills me about Protestantism, is this idea that we don't have a pope. And it's like, no, I'm sorry, you do. Many people are led by the religion and spirit of government and the science. Yeah, I mean, that's what they claim.
And sports.
I don't know when Father Stephen is going to have time next. He is quite busy and writing several books. Phlebas says, we know them by their fruit, which is why the CRC looks at Patriarch Putin and does not envy that system. Look, I'm not suggesting that Kirill has the power to bind and loose on earth as in heaven. I am suggesting that Rabbi Breidowitz does. And that is exactly, I mean, if you want a rabbi on YouTube, Rabbi Breidowitz is a rabbi on YouTube. And I'll put him up against any pope anywhere in the world.
I have some questions on the topic of binding and loosing. The church does talk a lot about binding and loosing. Most of them, if they're not charismatic or Pentecostal style churches, they talk about it in one frame of reference. And then if they are, they talk about it in another frame of reference. But they do talk about it. They might not use those words. So I've talked to you and I've talked to Joseph a bit. I don't think I've talked to Hazi about it. Some of those places, like we get into the bridges of meaning and we argue about different topics of meaning. And I watch some of the ways we talk. And I chat on some of the. I look at the sheer responsibility, taking it down just to like one of the finest levels of, as a parent teaching a child, and what we teach them and how, the spoken and the unspoken words we give them. And then I look at it, like, I don't know if Judaism does the same thing, but in a lot of churches, you struggle with, they talk about it in the marriage meaning thing. You struggle with the structure that they provide to you of God. I think it goes God, then church, then husband or father, wife and children, but there's a hierarchy that they talk through. And that should provide at least a glimmer of the kind of protection that having a pope is supposed to provide you, or whatever for the Judaism. There's well, not even just that way, but like going this way. There's dynamics within which we exist. And so I've thought a lot about that, partially because of all that I took on in my family as a role. Because I worry about, You know how in book club we would talk about things from top, below, and above? I told one counselor, I am the only oldest person in my family. I am the parent of 2 youngest children, married to a youngest child. Having an oldest who can't really function as an oldest, and a youngest who isn't sure, he kind of feels more like a middle child because he does both. And as the mother, the woman, and the wife in the role, I am supposed to stand in a certain place and have a certain context of authority in which I can stand and safely minister to the people that I fight for in my realm. And what we say, each one of us, married, unmarried, wherever we fit, in our cultures and our contexts, our words are generative.
Generative. Yeah.
Generative, and we get taught in each of our traditions something about what that means. And that's kind of the edge of my question. What we get told it means, what it does mean, what we believe it means, and how we function within those places. And that's why some of, Pentecost is not seen the same in churches. I haven't heard the bit you were sharing when I was walking about counting the days and how it linked up to the Omer and the plague and things like. I've never heard that before. I'm sure that people that could have told me that probably studied elements of it in school, but most of school stays in school. And then what they give the people is assuming that we're a whole lot less able to grasp it than that because it took them 4 years to learn it and something. So my question goes to that place, and I'm not sure how to frame it.
If I understand what you're saying, and maybe Chad is actually framing it better than most people do. Do you think counselors want their patients to get well? The question of leadership. So when Rabbi Wagner, who's my rabbi, came on my channel to talk about when the Rebbe passed away, I asked him, why the Rebbe? Why even after his death, right? And he said, because when you have a real leader, it's not about him, right? He doesn't make it about him, and that's what makes it about him. Because when you're trying to figure out how to do things and what to do, and it's from you, right? That's really, really difficult. And so we oftentimes have to outsource that, and we do outsource that to as many wise people as we can. And ultimately, the people who outsource it the best outsource it to God. And so the question ultimately becomes, who is representing God in this situation? And it's a very hard thing for anybody to say, I am the representative of God. And a lot of people, the funny thing is that the people who are most comfortable saying it are the people who are least likely to actually be the people who are doing it correctly. Because there are people who just, because they believe they are God, when they walk around, they believe they are the representative of God because they worship themselves.
Yeah.
And so one of the first questions you have to ask about someone who is representing God is, who is this God you are representing? And if the God you are representing is yourself, then all you're telling me is that you're fake. You are not representing yourself. You are just presenting yourself as a representation of yourself. If you are truly representing God, then you are representing something that's much bigger than you, something that cannot be encompassed within you. And that's a huge question. It's a difficult question. Who is representing God in my world? And to some extent, all people are.
Yep.
But some people do it better than others. And that is hierarchy. That is acknowledging the hierarchy, putting yourself in the hierarchy, and submitting to that hierarchy.
And that's goes to one of why I asked that question first, because, and maybe it's because I'm a woman, I don't know, but you know, I've talked a lot with you about my life, you know, on the Hebrew Bible study and other places. I used to irritate the heck out of Jack because I kept saying to him, "You are such a gift." And that bothered him because it's not a comfortable place to have somebody set you an expectation or anything. But after so much of the questions that were building up in me, when I would look at him and I would ask God some of those hierarchy kind of questions, you know, and I'd look to him and he'd say something wise, and I would sort of, you know, and I would want him to tell me more than once the same thing. You know, he was a far from perfect human being. I am under no illusion as to what all of his flaws were. Neither was he. But that wasn't the point. And I've talked about this on the Marriage Channel and Bridges of Meaning. It's not about finding a perfect person or a perfect whatever, but in the course of our struggle to be that to each other, every single one of us learns something about the difficulty of looking for it in other people. And that goes to that place of how much are we willing to have it cost us to find that which goes higher up. Because, you know, like, when Jack died, I could have just lay there and let myself die. And the harder thing is to listen to God and say, I have to let that go. Doesn't mean you're letting the person go in an unkind way, but you have to let it go. I had to, because if not, then I have stopped honoring God. You know?
Well, that's, yeah, I mean, it's part of accepting that the world is as it is, and it fails. And
God knows a heck of a lot more than I do about it. And
right. And we live in a world of decay where things are finite and die. Yeah. And I mean, you brought up something that I think is important that we tend to cursorily
back it up. Yes.
Which is there is a difference between male and female.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a reason why females are hypergamous, meaning women marry across and up, and men marry across and down. Because there is something to the masculine versus the feminine that is real and intrinsic, and so I'll do one of my Jacob's greatest hits.
So bad for my ex-husband because he did not do that, and I was a terrible choice for him. He was just looking for somebody outside his culture.
So Jacob's Greatest Hit number 32, Paul, I believe this is in Galatians, says there is no Jew or Gentile, or Jew or Greek, male or female, slave or free in Christ Jesus. And there's a particular way of reading that, which is a very Protestant way of looking at it, which is some people will say is the incorrect way of reading Paul. Whether it's the incorrect way or the correct way, it's the way that most people think of that sentence, which is there's no Jew or Greek, male or female, free or slave in Christ Jesus on a superficial level. And that is obviously false. It's silly. And the fact that our society currently is losing its mind over the fact that we can't tell between male and female is the fulcrum of showing that that sentence is itself not on the superficial level, on the primary level, obviously false. You can give me a deeper understanding of it, and it's something, that you can defend. But the superficial understanding of that sentence, the way that a sola scriptura Christian often will read that sentence, is so obviously false that in our society, you could get kicked off Twitter for stating the obvious fact there's a difference between males and females. And
I have a question follow-up.
Yeah, well, and for too many people, I think, look, it's a difficult thing to say, but it's a fundamental precept of not only my religion, but I believe also Christianity and Islam, that there is a qualitative difference between Jew and Greek in Christ Jesus. Go ahead, Sandy.
Well, it has to do with what I brought up about structures within a marriage relationship and a church relationship thing. If I think about if I think logically from just simply a generic person point of view, there is no, I can't use the word hierarchy because that's not what I mean. Oh heck, I'll use it because people throw that out there, but bear in mind that's not exactly what I mean. There is no hierarchical difference between being male or female, in the sense of God making you're born, but when I was in the church context and in the marriage context with John, there would be, comparing that and then my time with Jack, there was something that makes me smile still in what I learned, because to create, no, let me start from where I think that I was not a good choice for John. Like I said, I'm the oldest, and you get a lot of responsibility dumped on you as the oldest. But I also grew up in a system where there was a weird hierarchical thing between my parents and therefore between my sister and I as siblings. I do have a third sister we adopted later, but during my growing up. So in my sense, my now middle sister is actually the oldest. She's the one who has authority and status. We've talked about that, so it's good. We're actually learning to be pretty good friends. But in terms of bearing responsibility for that honor, I had to take up the slack, and I had to be that. And then I got married. And in the structure I married into, within the family I married into, in the relationship that we were forming in the marriage, that was not, it was similar to what I grew up in the sense that I'm not allowed to be the oldest that I am with the knowledge that I've come into it with, in the place that I can do certain things that I can do, because I have to remember that. And I'm a psychology friend of his, male, sent him home with a word he didn't understand that bears on this place that he asked me, and I, in that moment, wisely declined to say I suspected the meaning of, because he basically had to sort of in some way grind me down to be smaller than I am because of that hierarchy. It was very uncomfortable trying to be myself as either a woman, a wife, a mother, any female role, because I couldn't understand what that was supposed to look like, because it looked like being grounded down. And then Jack basically said about several of the things, mostly starting from the point of education, because I had gone to university, whereas he had gone to a trade college. He said he was afraid to let you be better than him. That was the problem. Jack had way more education. Well, Jack could have probably stayed in, actually he's incredibly intelligent. So even if we had equal amounts of educational level on a educational
I mean, Sandy, you're ultimately, I think you're pointing to
Well, the one thing I want to ask you about in this, though, from Jack's side, is I am mystified by the fact that the one that tried to raise me up is the one I would say yes, sir, to, because I loved saying yes, sir. I liked knowing. I loved that place of hierarchy. And I kept thinking, why? What is that?
Well,
Because
that's no. So you're pointing to something particular, which is that while there is a sort of hierarchy, firstborn, secondborn, etc.,
Yep.
right? That when you read through your Bible, you constantly see a subversion of that, constantly,
Yeah.
right? You constantly see that it's, and I mean, I do like to kind of jab Christians with this quote from Jesus. He says, don't be like the leaders of Gentiles who lord it over them,
Yep.
right? Not so amongst you. Whoever shall be the leader shall be the servant of all, right? Because that there is a sense of hierarchy which some people have, which is, oh, I am. You know what it reminds me of the most? There is a scene from Game of Thrones where Joffrey says, "I am the king," and Tywin, his grandfather, says, "Any man who says I am the king is obviously no king." Right? And this is something we play with constantly. Like if you're the one who has to go around saying, "I am the king," then you are no king. But at the same time, if you are the person who is no king and you don't actually rule, you don't actually set down the rules, right? So it's one thing to be the firstborn child. It's another thing to actually be the firstborn child. it's one thing to be the supposed master of the house and the head of the family. It's another thing to actually be that thing, right? This is something I'm constantly chiding Andrew and Richard about, which is, yeah, you're both 18, you're both adults, but that's just a legal thing that supposedly happened on your birthday, right? You're an adult when you start acting like an adult and other people start treating you like an adult. And you're not an adult when you're not acting like an adult and you're not, it doesn't matter what your age is. I'm 45 years old, right? And if my parents do end up coming to Chino, which they might, you will see when they're around, I'm like a 5-year-old. And wait until my dad sparks a tantrum in me and I start acting like a 2-year-old. It's
I had a mother, Andrew. I know this place too. And she used to say, I don't care how old you are, less X, Y, and Z.
well, the thing is, you know what? When you actually, as you mature, hopefully it certainly isn't like when I was 20. Like when I was 20, my father, like, I'll never forget. I went to orientation at USC, and the dean of my program, like the guy who was the head of my program, we went to a meet and greet. And so I was a public relations major. And my father turns to the guy who was the head of the public relations department and says to him, shouldn't somebody who's studying public relations actually be good at relating to the people in his life?
I think I like your dad. Jack would have said something like that. My ex wouldn't have known to. But that's a good one.
No, it's not. It's a horrible one. When you consider that this is me, his son, trying to impress, like, this is my professor, right? And frankly, anybody else, if he had said something like that, like, I'm not going to put up with it.
So how did you handle it?
I didn't.
Oh. Sorry.
No, I mean, what could I say? It was a reflection on my father more than it was a reflection on me. But that's something that I've had to deal with.
Yeah.
Like, being, like, there's a reason why I have a YouTube channel and my father doesn't. Right?
Well, and I say that about Jack and laugh because I certainly wasn't 20 when I met him.
Well,
I learned a thing or two. If I was 20, yeah.
But my father certainly thinks that more people should be asking him questions about things than should be asking me. And so when he's in the room, I have to remember to respect my father, right? And I do. And I try, right?
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's like, okay, saying something like that about your own son, right? Cutting me down in front of somebody who's just meeting me, who's like the head of the department of the school I'm about to go to. Like, what? Like, seriously?
Yeah, it's not wise. My dad would have done the same thing and thought it was hilarious.
It's beyond not wise. I mean, this is no, honestly, this is the type of toxic behavior that I had to learn to actually be like, okay, I'm not going to introduce my dad to people, you know? And the thing with Chino is
Oh, yeah.
It's beyond, no, it's beyond that. It's gotten to be, with me, like being an adult at 45, is now realizing, oh, you know what? Maybe when I was 18, people heard that and that really affected what they thought of me. But like, is anything my father going to say going to actually change?
I'm way
Um,
older than you,
Please,
Jacob, and my mother said the same
you
things
want to, if
all
you
the
want
time.
to say something, go ahead and say it, but don't do that.
When I would go to visit my mom, yeah. The amount I spoke around my family when I would go visit them, there was no point. I would sit quietly in the background, just pretending it was all okay. Yeah. So, and I was going to say, this is a lot of probably why you're so good at it right now. I know people don't tell you that always.
Well, lots of people tell me the opposite. Again, Chad, you're just wrong. No, he wasn't trying to reach me and teach me, Chad.
Yeah.
You're just wrong. He was trying to cut me down.
Yeah. My dad would do things like that from the point of he coped in ways Jack coped, with humor. My mom was a completely different thing, and she reacted out of a place where she really hated my dad doing that, and she really saw too much of my dad in me. And I watched my ex do that to my younger son for the same reason he would do things like that to him, because he saw too much of me in him. And that is not you're right, that is extremely toxic. Extremely.
Well,
And
okay,
so is
so
pride.
so let's I mean, let's take what Chad said, right? Let's say my father wanted to teach me and reach me. How would he have done that if that's what he wanted to do? He would have talked to me.
He would have treated you like a person. He would not have taught. Okay, so
There's, I mean, why was he doing it in front of somebody else, right?
yeah, because there's two ways you could do that to a child. I have reprimanded myself on places like this simply from having dealt with disability and going through all the different trainings at work for how you deal with disability.
Mm-hmm.
You do not speak past the person that you are speaking about, or like who's the focus of you don't do that. You don't put things like that into a disability context. You don't grab their wheelchair. You don't grab their cane out of their hand. You don't grab their arm and force them in a direction. You speak to them as an actual adult person, especially people that are just these days 17 or 18 going into school. You are forming that in them. So if you are going to take that person who's going into, what did you call your course?
Public relations.
If you have saying that to somebody who is saying, or if you're going to speak to the prof directly in that context, my son is going into public relations, and I hope that you, I hope that you find him a good student and take over from the place.
Well, that's the thing. My father didn't want me to be a public relations student.
So he's belittling the prof and you at the same time.
Yeah.
I know. Yeah.
So this has been the course of a lot of things, like including psychology and including religion, and a lot of things that I value that my father simply does not. And like, so my cousin is a psychiatrist, and whenever we see each other, like, we spend a lot of time talking because we have a lot, including our interest in psychology, together. And my father does the same thing. He comes and he says the same joke he tells every single time, which is, which is, every psychiatrist has a permanent patient.
Themselves.
Yeah, it's
You're
and
only
my
good
father
because you're messed
my
up.
father comes and he tells this joke to my cousin,
Yeah.
right? And it's like, really? Like, really? And it's look, as a child, it's really, really difficult to separate yourself from that, because he's your father, right? And for me, it's, for a long time, the only way I could deal with that was just not being there, or just avoiding my father, and that's one way of being your own person. I it wasn't that long ago. I was in this apartment, so it was less than a year ago that this happened. But a similar thing happened, and I called the other person and was like, my father said X, but I didn't say X, so you're not invited over to my place. I've told some people the entirety of this story, right? And just recognizing the fact that I had that capacity of being another person who is not just an extension of my parents. It's bad that it took me so long, but I'm glad that I at least finally got it. Whereas I think there's way too many people who at some point can't recognize that, oh, that's a different person. And even though I have some relationship, he's my father, he's my mother, or she's my mother, that only reflects on me to some degree. Only what I do and what I say is what actually reflects on me.
Yeah.
But
No, I'm just reading the comment.
there's a Talmudic saying something like that. More the teacher gains from the student than the student from the teacher. More than the teacher wishes to teach. More than the student wishes to learn, the teacher wishes to teach. Although I'm not sure how you're using that in that context.
So, in a way, if you want to answer this goes to sort of the third element of my questions that I came in with, which isn't really at all on this topic, I think. But so feel free to stay on this topic.
Genius move, Andrew.
Thanks. I'm still terrified by it.
Phlebas says having a son puts those stories in another light. Obviously, yeah. Yeah. That's another thing I've been talking to Richard and Andrew about. As a child, it's really, really hard to relate to what it's like to be a parent. Not that I've had kids, but I'm old enough to have seen that relationship a lot more than even some people who claim to be parents.
Yeah. Sorry, mulling over things my youngest son has said about topic.
Jacob is your youngest or your older?
Oldest.
Oldest. You have 2 sons, right?
2 sons, yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
No daughters?
My mom used to ask me that. Okay, I'm one of those weird.
Hold on, your mom used to ask you if you have daughters? She
No,
didn't know?
to have a daughter.
Oh, to have a daughter.
To have a daughter. She was still asking me when I hit your age, say, and I was going, Mom, I'm not gonna have a daughter like now. I'm just not, like I don't even know. Like, and she said, you can adopt one. My sister and her husband couldn't have children. Both of theirs are adopted. Absolutely lovely people. So Jacob, my oldest, and I have had this conversation actually. And he said the same thing I did, and I can't remember if I, in some random moment, said it to him, and he's just got that, like I can go back for eons kind of memory that some people do, because he remembers stuff that we're all like, how does he even remember that? But I'm one of those people that when pregnant says they know what they're having, and I lost 3, so I always wanted 5, and I thought that it went girl, boy, 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 boy. So possibly whatever happens to those unborn babies, I don't know. Like maybe I have a daughter. So yeah, but I didn't get to raise one. They're hard. Oh my goodness. Oh yeah, they're a challenge. Mm-hmm.
Chad.
Hey there.
How's it going?
Good.
It's going. How are you guys?
Just awesome. I have now wept on screen again.
It's becoming a tradition.
Goals of life to count how many times that happens. No.
We don't allow crying on this channel at all.
There's no crying in baseball.
There's no crying in baseball. No.
Are all 3 of you going to the thing?
Chino, so Sandy is coming, Andrew is coming to some of the things, and I am coming, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, cool. Well, it'll be lovely to meet you all.
Yep.
Nice.
My parents may or may not. I invited my parents. I don't know if they're going to show up.
Jacob, we should sit down and do a 4th step.
Parents come, you can voice them off on me. I have an extremely high tolerance for being talked at.
My parents wouldn't do much talking. Well, I don't actually know the 4th step all that well. I looked it up when you mentioned it, but I have to say so it says 4th step is made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves, and I have to say my moral inventories are often the wise people I have consulted oftentimes tell me that I am too critical, not critical enough.
Chad, so my sister went through Al-Anon and recommended it to me. I tried and failed miserably for the same reasons. I would tell Jacob, be very careful of the 4th step.
It's a constructive exercise. It's not supposed to be.
I know, but I'm in that same boat as Jacob is, where I overthink, overanalyze, and then just completely. I would dissipate myself on purpose way harder than my ex ever would, and you don't want to know stuff he's.
Yeah, but I mean, there are plenty of people who have those same tendencies who have done a successful 4th step. The word moral in there just basically means truth. So making a searching and fearless inventory of truth about myself, right? And then so it's just it's It's taking a moment to try to see things from an entirely different point of view.
Then unofficially, I have definitely done the 4-step.
Well,
Because like a resentment, right? Because the first thing it deals with is resentments, and a resentment is like something that you resend, a memory that you resend, you revisit and revisit and revisit, and each time you kind of get further and further away from the truth about it, and then you start to attach new kinds of feelings to it, and then really constructing justifications, and and some of those might technically be permitted, but it's like there's another aspect where it's like, well, how free do you want to be? Because if you're like me, I can live in a prison of mirrors that are resentments, and I can't really, I can't, even after having done a few of these, I still have difficulty being around people. And so another way of looking at a 4th step too, it's like it's a map of where I've been, and therefore it's a map of where I don't want to go. And so that's I don't know.
That's
so
go
the
ahead.
I mean, one thing about the any psychological evaluation and intervention is it has to fit the situation.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, I think a lot of times, so for example, CBT techniques or 12-step stuff,
Mm-hmm.
right? If the wrong person goes through that same process, they can end up, because a lot of times these psychological interventions are meant to help you realign yourself to get back into normal human functioning. Obviously, I mean, there are certain things that becoming an alcoholic, becoming an addict, there are ways in which it distorts how you interact with other people. And the 12 steps, from everything I've seen, are really, really good at helping most people who've gone through that cycle of addiction. At the same time, I think if your demons are different demons, going through that same evaluation, that same way of dealing with things, could actually feed your particular demons.
Only
Yeah.
if you're unwilling to surrender your self-centered point of view.
So I talked to my sister a lot about this. One of the things we came to, I was gonna say, for me trying to do what she did, actually it could make me a lot worse in where I am, because we process differently. Growing up, and I was going to say it also kind of goes back to where Jacob and I were talking about a while ago, in terms of timing of things and how things happen and who you're listening to and how you form within yourself, your relationship to, well, for me, I'd say God, and others, and how you process things. And so my sister is much like my mother, who was a legal secretary, very black and white thinker, handled some of the trauma completely differently than me. And so for her, she said she loved the way that she would work through the steps, because they only gave you the one at a time. They give you this, like a small bite, and she can do, okay, and this, and it's done like that, done. And then she can move to something else, and she processes her whole world that way. She's a music teacher. I I survived music up until grade 5 practical and my 3rd theory test. We come at it completely differently. I cannot get through something the way she does because I don't process things in the same way. So when I went for counseling to look for my own way to work through the steps of getting from, okay, what's at the core of this? How do I find what's at the core of this? How do I open things, and how do I let go of things? People still give me weird looks for going to see my ex on a like every week or 2 basis to check in on him. That's a weird thing. But I think it would be part of what you would describe as steps. And the fact that he's allowing me to be sort of friends, like on his outer circle of friends, given the things that went on between us and were said between us. I think for him, that's also part, because he has a very hard time in a different way allowing people in his help network. He would absolutely never do either counseling or steps. Never.
Well, I mean,
Is processing things.
there's something different that I'm trying to communicate with Chad. So obviously, you know a lot more about being an alcoholic than I do, and I'm just learning about it. But so for instance, one of the things that in my classes we've made, what appears to me to be true, is that for a lot of alcoholics, one of the characteristics that they are very likely to have is actually not thinking about how their actions impact other people, right? And so that's a thing that most, if not all, alcoholics have, which is a common factor that through a 12-step program, you work very hard on helping someone who inadequately thinks about how their actions impact others come to a point where they can actually consider how they impact others. Now, somebody who is OCD, for example, on the other hand, is constantly thinking about how every action impacts others, and is in fact obsessed with it, so that a lot of the interventions you would want to do for somebody with OCD is to get them to stop thinking about how everything they do could impact somebody else. Right?
Yeah.
And so if you take somebody with OCD and put them through the 12 steps, right? That is in fact going to feed their demon.
Well, I disagree. I think if there's poor direction going through them, yes, but I think both. So it's not necessarily how it's affecting others. It's more of both, and I think this actually is the common cultural thread is selfishness and self-centeredness. Now, when most people hear that, they're going to hear a pejorative, and that's not what I'm thinking at all. I'm just thinking that's how people are wired, and it's when that kind of gets.
But Chad, you realize some people are too selfless, right?
that's still self-centered.
Oh yes. Oh yes. So
So
this
that's
is
what I'm
yeah,
saying,
yeah.
and
No,
that's
no,
what I'm
no.
talking about.
There is a point in which
That's how it
people's
works for
Yeah.
Al-Anons, because the Al-Anons problem will most likely be a problem
Right.
of control and martyrdom, and
Yes. Yeah.
and so that's how the same process can work on both at
Right.
both extremes, because again, the steps have to be approached first of all only if somebody is in a desperate position, which means to be in a hopeless and impossible situation to deal with. So they'll do that, and it's actually not to be a deconstructed process; it's a constructed process to see things rightly, to find out what were my mistakes, right? Because here's where the steps get goofy. When people misquote them and stuff, they'll say things, you want to look for your own part. And it's like, no, the steps don't say that. They talk about, I want to find my where were my mistakes. This is how, like, I can find, if I was somebody who was, say, sexually abused or anything like this, like, I don't have a part in that, right? But I do have mistakes that around that situation that can cause me a lot of pain throughout my life, which will play out in various different actions that can cause all sorts of troubles. And so I want to address my mistakes, and then just see where I can right some of my own wrongs in the past, and then in doing this whole thing, like, little by little by little, aiming at how to be a servant of sorts. It doesn't mean, and I'm not talking about being a doormat, but being somebody who is made useful.
No,
So that's all.
you're right, and I'm not saying what I'm hopefully, and I still think is true of what I'm saying is sometimes when something is crooked one way, you push it this way, and sometimes when something is crooked that way, you push it this way, right? Because you're trying to recenter things, right? And
Right, but so
it's
like the first 9 steps basically get you working with that tool, so that, and then as you move on into the later 3 steps, you're acquainted with the tool so you can rightly use it
but
when it's
Chad,
appropriate.
not everybody is an alcoholic.
Oh,
I fundamentally believe that the steps can work for anybody. I mean, an Al-Anon isn't an alcoholic.
Well, yes, Al-Anon isn't, but again, I think trying to use the 12-step on in every situation, it's one of the things I very much push back against.
Well, it's only,
Because
Jacob. That's
yeah.
only because you're standing. It's like trying to describe, I don't know what it's like to get drunk to somebody who's never gotten drunk. You're on the outside fundamentally, so you don't have a working understanding of it. This is common. This is a common thing. So, like, it's extremely hard to explain to somebody who hasn't gone through the process what it will be like, and yes, it's uncomfortable, very uncomfortable.
It's not a question of uncomfortable, Chad. It's a question of whether it's appropriate for somebody who's not an alcoholic. And I think you're kind of saying it yourself, like somebody who's never been drunk, who's never been intoxicated, right?
Yes.
Trying to explain that to them, right?
Okay. Do the steps address alcohol?
Not specifically, as far as I know.
No, they don't.
Okay.
Because alcohol is a symptom.
Right.
Right. And what the steps address is what it really does is it reconnects me to God. That's what it does. Because that's at the bottom of my whole problem.
Mm.
And so that's what all the steps are about.
Dan's saying something I was going to say.
Yeah, no, I've already went. One of my classes, I went to
What did you
two
say?
different. He said there are different 12-step programs for different things.
Yeah.
And like for one of my classes, I went to an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting. For another, I also went to an Overeaters Anonymous meeting, and they're very different, as they well should be. You can't tell an Overeaters Anonymous person to stop eating, right? Obviously,
right, because food isn't the problem. Again,
that's what I meant about the conversations I've had with my sister and me. For her, she was also living in a because of her the family she married into. It also made sense to use that particular program. She could relate to it in ways I can't. The issues I was facing are different, and we would compare notes. And we got to the same place, but we used not so much what you would call different steps, but just a different map of how to get there.
Yeah. So
different problems require different solutions. You can't use a hammer as your only tool.
Right. I agree. But so yeah. I'm not going to convince anybody of this. All I know is...
But the conversation on the things that are carried over in each step can happen regardless of whether the person is following you through the steps. You can still sit and talk to somebody like Jacob or me about what is covered in the fourth step, how it's important, how it will, you can have a conversation where we talk about it because I've done this with my sister. You can do that.
Right.
Yeah. Which doesn't mean that we're negating, ever talking about the things.
Right. So as it was relating to Jacob's story with his father, there was something I saw potentially in that story, even though I've never met your dad. And I guarantee that my father was far harsher than yours and has done things unbelievable that I've been able to see differently.
Okay,
and that was helpful.
I did not mean to use that story as a way of saying that my father was a harsh, or he obviously isn't, and
No, I know that you weren't.
He's actually a very good father.
Yeah. I was getting at was something different, because you said, well, it's really toxic, and it's like, well, it might be toxic, but that doesn't mean that there wasn't wisdom in what he was saying.
No, so what he was doing at that point was, in fact, expressing his resentment over my choice and of major and career. And he was doing it by trying to sabotage me.
Okay. Was what he said, was there truth in what he said?
Only in relation so I generally, I hope somebody who knows me by now knows that I'm actually, I hate having to say this, but I'm actually pretty good at communicating and at being influential in terms of gathering groups together. And so and that's been something that's been true since I was young. I've always, and that's part of why I decided to go into public relations, was because even in high school, I was very capable of, and that's why I got a scholarship to go to USC. And what my father was saying was obviously false.
Okay. Well,
what
everything I've said here is completely useless.
No, look, sometimes you have to seriously be like, but the problem at that moment was not that I wasn't listening to my father, because I do listen to my father, and there's a lot of wisdom in a lot of the things that my father has said throughout my life. And I will quote my father, and it's not like my father's not somebody who has wise things to offer. He often does. But in my estimation, he was always wise and right. And the problem I had growing up was not that I didn't think of my father as being wise and having something to say, but thinking everything he said was always right.
Mm-hmm.
And the way I took it back when I was 18, when he said that, is, oh, yeah, I'm never going to be good at this. I'm never going to be capable because my father doesn't think that I can do this.
Mm-hmm.
And that negation, the problem I had was the opposite of the problem you're thinking, which is, I thought my father says I can't do this, so I must not be able to do this, because my father is a wise person who knows so much more than me, and I should always, and my like, what stopped me for a long time from being an adult was, in fact, oh, my father's the wise one. My father knows, and if he thinks I'm doing the wrong thing, then he must be right and I must be wrong.
Well, I'm sorry if I've tried to too much on some personal stuff here, but
No,
I gotta get running.
One of my channels, like, way too much personal stuff. But yeah.
See, Jacob, you should have took that as a hold my beer moment and then shoved it right up his ass. You know, what the hell, dude?
I missed this kind of advice growing up.
Maybe that's what he was doing. Maybe he was trying to goat you into fucking proving him wrong. You know, I don't know. Who knows? Anyways, I gotta get running. I gotta go have some dinner. Good
Talk
night.
to you later. Be
We've
well.
lost Andrew.
Okay. I should probably end. It's been 3 hours. I should probably end this.
Oh my gosh, it's 5:30. Yeah, I have class tonight.
Okay. I'm gonna end the stream. Good night, people.
Thank you. Good night.